While the NL East race is all but over for the New York Mets, if there was a time to make their last stand, it's right now. The Mets will play 4 games against the Phillies in Philadelphia starting tonight.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, the Mets last faced the Phillies not even 2 weeks ago, and they swept them across the 3-game set. Since then, the Phillies have won 7 of 10. The Mets have lost 6 of 10. So all the hard work the Mets did, where we were talking about the division still being in play, how the Mets had slashed a 7-game lead to a 4-game lead, how they completely embarrassed Philly, and Phillies fans were jumping off a bridge. They were freaking out. They were calling their team frauds and everything else. They were completely jumping off the bandwagon after the Mets outscored the Phillies 25-8 in that series. That all got washed away. It's all gone now because the Mets could not get the job done, and the Phillies did. The Phillies did. They had a 4-game series against the Braves, and unlike the Mets, who have really struggled against Atlanta this year, Phillies, no problem. They came home, they licked their wounds, they scored 19 runs against the Braves in the first game of that series, and they took 3 of 4. Meanwhile, the Mets played the Marlins, and they lost 3 of 4. So right there, that was just the difference, basically. That you just went from this incredible high, and then it all crashed and burned because you couldn't beat the Marlins. If the Mets had just held serve, it'd still be a 4-game deficit. And then if they had held serve again, same thing. And actually the Mets did, because the next series was against the Tigers, and the Mets won that one. The Phillies, though, they went into Milwaukee and they beat the Brewers, which is even more impressive than the Mets beating the Tigers. Then you had this past weekend, Mets had a chance to potentially put the Reds out of the playoff race. If they were to sweep the Reds, they would have really knocked them out of contention. Instead, they let the Reds hang in there. The Reds take 2 of 3. Meanwhile, the Phillies come down to Miami, and instead of doing what the Mets did, which is fall flat in their face against a spoiler, Phillies took care of business and took 2 of 3. And so now again, here we are, 7-game lead for the Phillies in the National League East with 19 left to play. Now, the last time that we were previewing a Mets versus Phillies series, I took you all the way back down memory lane and talked about how there was a year in 2007 that we all remember well, where the Mets blew a massive lead in the National League East. And I talked about how at the time, the Mets were holding on to a 7-game lead with 19 left to play. Well, I was actually wrong about that. One of the listeners had corrected me at the time and said, actually, it was a 7-game lead with 17 left to play for the 2007 Mets. And they blew it. And interesting thing about the parallels, not that I really expect history to repeat itself and for all of us to get to bury that long angst we've had whenever we even think about 2007. It is a little bit interesting if you go back to that year. I'm trying to actually pull it up on the fly right now. There was a couple of series where the Phillies beat up on the Mets. There was one basically started the same day, August 27th. Actually, I'm thinking maybe that it doesn't matter. The dates don't matter. But the point is, at the end of August, the Mets went into Philly and they got swept in a 4-game set. Then after that, the Mets reeled off 5 in a row and 9 of 10, make it 10 of 12 before they saw the Phillies again for a 3-gamer at, what was that? That still would have been Shea, right? And they ended up getting swept by the Phillies again. And that, launched their spiral from that point on, as they would go on to lose a series to the Nationals. They took a 4-gamer against the Marlins in Florida at the time. Then they got swept by the Nationals, lost a makeup game to the Cardinals, and then at home lost 2 of 3 and blew that division. For the Phillies, they would have to have an incredible collapse not to make the playoffs. Don't see it happening, but theoretically, sure, it has happened in the past. And right now, if you're just talking about where these teams are at, it is a parallel line pretty much to what happened in 2007, just with these teams having their roles flipped. So we'll see. Maybe the Mets have some magic left in them. It's hard to buy into that, though, at this very moment. So as we look at this series and where each team has their advantage, I'll say that the Mets, I still believe, have a significantly better lineup than the Phillies, which might sound crazy, but offensively, I just think this Mets team is deeper. I think they have more pop. For the Phillies right now, as far as the last time I checked, they still only have 2 guys who have hit over 20 home runs this season: Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber. Now, Kyle Schwarber is leading the National League in home runs now that Suarez has been moved out of the league, and I think Aaron Judge might still be. And I don't even know if Aaron Judge is past Schwarber at this point. It might just be Cal Raleigh that's still ahead of Schwarber at this point. But beyond those 2, they don't have a lot of guys that can leave the yard. The Mets have a ton of guys who can leave the yard. I think if the Mets are going to win this series, they got to bludgeon the Phillies. They got to win these games by putting up double-digit runs. I don't know how the Mets veteran pitchers are really going to hold up in this environment, pitching in a really tough place to pitch against a team that does play a lot better at home. I don't feel great about that. I think if the Mets are really going to hold their own, they're going to need to score a ton of runs. Otherwise, the Phillies are going to be talking about their magic number at the end of this week, because right now it's sitting at 13. With a couple of wins, they're going to drop that thing into the single digits, and then it's just a countdown to their second straight division title. Again, I don't really believe the Mets can rally all the way back into this division, but at least put up a fight here. At least show some pride and make it tough on the Phillies. Don't just roll over. Go out there and give them a good punch and strike that fear back in the heart of Phillies fans everywhere, because at the end of the day, if you are able to find your way to win this series, regardless of what happens in this division race, come playoff time, the Mets are not going to be scared to play in Citizens Bank, and they'll never say it publicly, but I think the Phillies will be scared to go to Citi Field considering how bad they've played there. So this is a huge series for the Mets as just a measuring stick more than anything, and a moment to show some pride against your division rivals and hopefully take some games. Now, the one other thing to note about the Phillies and their lineup, they could be missing a very key contributor. Trea Turner left the game on Sunday with the hamstring strain. Now, we still don't know the severity of that hamstring, whether he's going to be out for weeks and potentially miss the rest of this regular season at least, or if it's going to be a day-to-day thing. But I think either way, it'd be very surprising to see Trea Turner back in the lineup tonight. Probably if he does make it back, if it really is the most minor of hamstring pulls, you could potentially see him at the tail end of this series. But I think there's a good chance that you miss Trea Turner entirely, and he has been one of their hottest hitters lately. He was hitting .345 over his last 13 games played, leading the team with 20 hits. Kyle Schwarber been a bit cold lately, hitting .173, but he's still drawing his walks, still hitting his home runs, 4 home runs over his last couple of weeks. Bryce Harper's been solid during that span, but not spectacular, with a .781 OPS. And then you have Harrison Bader and Braden Marsh, who are killing it, with, again, Bader hitting .370 and Marsh .415. But the rest of this lineup is relatively cold. So, again, if the Mets are going to win, they got to do it with the bats, but they also need their pitching to not completely implode. Who's going in this series and what do we think about it? We're going to talk about all of that just in a minute here. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k, properties, investments, and when you don't have that full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts on Monarch, and I realized, man, a lot of subscriptions I was paying for that I was not using. Also, you start to see some of those purchases you make each week, like takeout, that add up, that you maybe need to be a little more conscious of. So just be a little more aware. Don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONMLB. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're almost 500 away. I would love to get there by the end of the season, so I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the pitching matchups. If there's one game in this series the Mets have an advantage in, it's tonight. You got Nolan McLean going up against Aaron Nola. Now, Nola missed a big chunk of this season. He first hurt his ankle, and then while working his way back from the ankle, he ended up with an injured rib cage. So he was out for pretty much all of June, July, came back in August. Prior to going down, he had a 6.16 ERA across his first 9 starts. Since coming back, he has an 8.38 ERA over his last 4 starts. So if there's one guy to hit, it's Nola. His lone good start since coming back was against the Nationals. That came after his first start off the IL was against the Nationals. He got knocked out of that game in the 3rd inning, but he was able to settle back in and put up a quality start against the Nationals. But his last 2 have been rough. He went only 4 innings gave up 4 against the Braves over 6, and then he gave up 6 over 5 innings against the Brewers. Now, McLean, last time you saw the Phillies, he went 8 shutty. He has a 1.37 ERA through his first 4 big league starts. So huge edge to the Mets tonight. You got to win this game. You win this game, you give yourself a fighting chance for the rest of this series, because after it, you got to face the 3 lefties. These are the guys that are likely going to be pitching games 1 through 3 in the playoffs for the Phils. Ranger Suarez, Christopher Sanchez, and Jesus Luzardo. Suarez is going to get the ball first in game 2 against Sean Manaea. He has a 2.89 ERA on the season across 22 starts. Has only given up 1 run over his last 3 starts. So he has been on a really good streak lately. Not an easy pitcher, a bulldog that lives for big moments. So he's going to be tough. We'll see if Sean Manaea can be tough as well. His best start since the calendar turned to August actually did come against the Phillies when he went 4 2/3, struck out 8, and gave up just 2 earned runs. But every other start that he's made since the trade deadline has been bad, where he's given up 4 or 5 earned runs. We forget, if you're wondering, why did the Mets have so much faith in Sean Manaea at the trade deadline? His first 4 appearances off the IL, he gave up 1 earned run in each outing. Now, he wasn't going deep into games, but he still had a 2.08 ERA through July. So you can understand why the Mets believed that they were going to ramp him up a little bit. He would start to pitch deeper into games, and he would be the guy that we came to know and love last year. Well, that's far been the case for Manaea, but this is a start where he should have plenty of adrenaline pitching in a playoff atmosphere on the road. We'll see what he does with it. It would be really huge for the Mets if they could get Sean Manaea to turn in 3 really good starts to close out this season, not only because that would help them in a huge way to just make the playoffs, but that would make you feel confident to hand him the ball in a playoff start. Although even if he does inspire enough confidence before then, I am sure the Mets would be very ready to have a quick hook on him in any of those types of starts, whether it is in the playoffs or if it's some of these starts down the stretch in games that matter to make sure you get there. I think for this one, this is probably the last time that we see Sean Manaea, assuming he has, well, if he has a good start, we'll see it again. But if he ends up having a bad start here, I think this is the last time that he has a start like unencumbered where you don't have a piggyback option in place. I mean, you have a Justin Hageman still on the roster right now that can give you length. But I think after this, considering the volume of starting pitchers the Mets have, if he has a bad outing, we're going to see Sean Manaea potentially pitch out of the bullpen in tandem with another starting pitcher. Maybe it would be someone like a Clay Holmes, who is going in game 3 of this series against Christopher Sanchez. Now, Sanchez has been great all season, 2.60 ERA in 28 starts, but his worst start of the year came against the Mets in that last series at Citi Field, gave up 6 runs in that start. Did that set him back? Not in the slightest. His 2 starts since then, 7 innings pitched, 1 earned run each time, first against the Braves, then against the Marlins. So Christopher Sanchez is still going to be a really tough matchup despite how well the Mets swung it against him last time. Now, Clay Holmes has not seen the Phillies this year, so that's a little interesting. They never got in those first 3 series. He gave up 2 earned runs or less in 7 of his last 8 starts. That's an interesting stat that I don't think we realize, just considering how much discussion there has been about Clay Holmes and whether he can really hold up as a starting pitcher for a full season. He's got 3 weeks left. I mean, there really is a chance here where Clay Holmes is going to stay in the rotation because there's so much uncertainty with some of these other guys. Again, if Sean Manaea doesn't pitch well in this start, I could see him piggybacking off of Holmes the same way he started this season right before the All-Star break. I really could see that tandem being a thing next week. So we'll see how each of them do, but there is another part of Clay Holmes' recent success. Again, 2 earned runs or less in 7 of his last 8 starts. On the other side of that coin, though, he's only recorded an out in the 6th inning 1 time during that span. It really hasn't been pitching into the 6th inning much at all for months now. So are you going to get length out of Clay Holmes? Maybe not. But you know what? If he's 5 and dive and he leaves with a lead, you'll take it because that could mean a victory in this series. And if you win game 1, that could mean coming out with a split. Honestly, if the Mets take 2 in this series, I'm fine. 500 road trip, and I don't think that you're going to be that much worse for wear in this wild card race, even if you lose 2 of these 4 games. What you can't have is the other side of it where you lose the series or even worse. So the Mets have to just do everything they can to hang into these games, and they're going to need these starting pitchers to step up in a huge way. And the guy that I really would love to see step up more than any other is David Peterson. David Peterson is on the verge of being in that same discussion as Manaea, Senga. These guys who just can't seem to figure it out. He's had a couple of bad starts here where he just has not been the same guy that was an all-star this season. And for the longest time, you thought David Peterson was going to be the game 1 starter for the Mets, just partially by default, but because he had earned that. Now, I'm not entirely convinced he's going to make playoff starts. I still lean towards Peterson. Right now, if I'm ranking the Mets starters that I have the most confidence in grabbing the ball for a wild card start, it's Nolan McLean game 1 and still probably David Peterson game 2. But the other 2 rookies are making a push. They've at least showcased an ability to pitch deep into games, whereas the veterans haven't been doing that. Even Peterson, outside of facing the Nationals and going 8, a couple weeks back, he's been struggling to give the Mets length. So it's going to be interesting to see how he responds in that environment, pitching in a huge game against Jesus Luzardo. I'm hoping for the best that David Peterson can figure it out. He did not see the Phillies in that last series, but he did pitch in Citizens Bank in the series earlier this season, and he gave up 5 runs in 4 innings pitched. So we'll see what Peterson does. Meanwhile, Jesus Luzardo has nasty stuff at the same time. We did see him in that last series, and he only went 4 innings, gave up 4 runs. So the Mets did show an ability to get to him, but Jesus Luzardo is a really dynamic left-handed starting pitcher who throws absolute gas. So we'll see. He went 6 innings against his former team the last time out over the weekend here, gave up 2 runs across the 6 innings. And his start prior to that, the one after the Mets series, he went 6 2/3 and did not allow a run, gave up just 2 hits and a walk. So if you really are going to say who has the pitching advantage in each game, the Mets have the big pitching advantage in game 1. I would say probably the biggest pitching advantage. Granted, it's still Aaron Nola. He's still a veteran that could find it on a given day. But after that, I think the Phillies have an edge in each and every one of these games. I would take Suarez over Manaea right now. I don't know how you could argue the other side of it unless you're just a complete homer for the Mets. He has not been very good lately. So that's a huge question mark. Game 2, Clay Holmes. I feel better about Holmes than I feel about Manaea and maybe even Peterson to an extent right now. And yet, Christopher Sanchez is going to finish top 5 in Cy Young voting this year. So Phillies have a big edge there. And Jesus Luzardo has been inconsistent. So if you were going to say the Mets had an edge in any other game this series, it would be Peterson versus Luzardo. But Peterson hasn't been very good. So the Mets are going to need the bats to show up and beat up on some of these lefties for the Phillies and certainly try to continue the latest trends when it comes to Aaron Nola. They're also going to need their starting pitchers to find their way through 4 or 5 innings without blowing a game entirely. And that's going to be easier said than done, honestly. But I still think the Mets have the better starting lineup. I really do think that they have a deeper lineup with more pop and more firepower. And this is a ballpark where you can really use that firepower to advantage. And hit a bunch of home runs and score a ton of runs. So that's what the Mets got to do. They got to lead with their bats, and they need the veteran starting pitchers to meet them halfway. They also need the bullpen to be nails, and it hasn't been that lately. But there's 3 weeks left for the New York Mets to get things right, and if they're able to go into a hostile environment and win a series against the Phillies, that's going to give them a lot of confidence to finish out their season strong. Anyway, that is going to be it as far as our series preview, but we still got one more segment because Tylor Megill made a rehab start in Syracuse on Sunday. I want to talk about how he did and what the plan might be for him moving forward, so we're going to get to all of that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Zippix. Need a boost to power through the day without reaching for another cup of coffee or an energy drink? That's where Zippix caffeine toothpicks come in. Instead of the crash you get from those sugary drinks, Zippix gives you a clean, convenient boost of caffeine anytime, anywhere. And if you're looking for that nicotine satisfaction, they've got Zippix nicotine toothpicks as well. I've used the caffeine toothpicks, before a big meeting, and I was surprised how much energy I really got from just gnawing on a toothpick. They're pocket sized, they're discreet. You can take them anywhere. Their flavors are legit, like this one, the peppermint watermelon ice. You also have the spearmint, and it's not just energy. It actually tastes good. If you're ready to try them, go to zippix.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON for 10% off your first order. That's Zippix, Zippix, toothpicks.com. Promo code LOCKEDON. Zippix toothpicks, energy and focused anytime you need it. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and get a line graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about Tylor Megill. He made a start on Sunday. It was supposed to be potentially his last rehab start. The goal was to get him over 85 pitches, and that did not happen. He did not make it out of the third inning. First inning, got a pop-up, then he gave up a solo homer before hitting a batter, but he settled in and struck out the next 2 to get through the first inning, having given up only the 1 run on the homer. Second inning, gives up a leadoff single, gets a flyout, then he walks a batter, then he throws a wild pitch to advance both runners. Gives up a base hit that scores 1, but he was able to get a big strikeout that helps him get through the inning as he would get a ground out to escape, again, giving up just 1. Third inning, issues a leadoff walk, hits a batter, then gives up a single in a very long at bat, and he was pulled. So he ends up going 2+, and unfortunately for Megill, Richard Lovelady came on, gave up a single and then a grand slam, allowing all 3 inherited runners to score. So Megill goes 2+, gives up 5 on 4 hits, 2 walks, and a hit by pitch. Struck out 3, only got up to 67 pitches. So where does that put the Mets with Tylor Megill? Well, he only has 4 days left on his 30-day rehab assignment. When guys first get sent on assignment, they have 30 days to make their way back up to the big league club, which means the Mets have 3 options here. Option 1, they petition to the league to extend his rehab assignment. So they can ask the league, say, he's still not healthy, he's still not right, can we tack on a couple of extra weeks? That's one option. And who knows if the league would sign off on that? And who knows if you even want to petition the league, because option 3, I think, is easier. Option 2 would be you activate him and put him in your bullpen. The Mets, to add Braden Sproat to the roster on Sunday, they DFA'd Justin Garza to clear up room on the 40-man roster. And Garza was in Syracuse, so they just had to get him off to add Sproat to the 40. They sent down Wander Suero, and they also sent down Kevin Herget as Reed Garrett was activated off the injured list on the minimum amount of days that he had to spend on that injured list. So now you got Garrett back, you got Sproat who's going to stay on this roster. So if there was anyone who would go down for Megill, it would be Justin Hageman. But I think Hageman is much better served to pitch in that mop-up duty role that the Mets are looking for. I think you're really better off keeping Megill in Syracuse and trying to see if he can get himself up to 85 pitches and looking good just in case you need him to make a start in the final 2 weeks of the season. So here's the final option. Instead of trying to petition the league or doing any of that, Tylor Megill still has an option. So the Mets can wait until September 12th when he's supposed to return. They can activate him and then option him to AAA. That solves your problem. Just like Kodai Senga got option, Tylor Megill gets option next. Now, the interesting thing for Megill, he's obviously still under team control. They have 2 years left after this season, and the Mets can still preserve that option. I know these things get confusing, so I always try to reiterate for those of you who might not listen to the show regularly. So for those of you who do, I apologize for going through this again. But basically, an option is an option year, not an option where every time you send somebody down, you use an option. So for Megill, this is his final option year. He still has one left. But the Mets have not optioned him all season. When he has pitched in the minor leagues recently, that has been off of the IL, which does not count as a minor league option. If you spend less than 20 days in the minor leagues in a given season and not on a rehab assignment, actually being activated an option to that AAA roster, you hold on to that option for next season, or the Mets hold on to that option for next season. And with the amount of time that's left this season, the Mets can just wait the next couple days. Once they get to the 12th, they can activate him, option him to AAA, and that would then allow them to hold on to that option and stash him in AAA for the rest of the year. So then Megill makes a start next weekend. You try to get him over 85 pitches again. And if he does that and you think he's your best option to make a start in the following week, you could do that. If you think he's a better option out of the bullpen than Justin Hageman at that time, or whoever the AAA reliever is who's taken that roster spot, you absolutely can do that. So that's where the Mets are at here with Tylor Megill. I don't think we see him this week after that rough outing. I think he gets one more rehab start, or again, maybe it's not technically a rehab start. Maybe it's his first start actually on a minor league assignment. But I imagine he's still pitching in Syracuse next weekend. Now, a lot of his future role is going to depend on how the veterans look. So we'll get our first hand on seeing how those guys pitch in this upcoming series over the weekend. Next weekend, though, or this weekend, you're not going to see any of the veterans. It's going to be all the kids. It's going to be Tong, McLean, Sproat in some order that will pitch against the Rangers. And then with 2 weeks left after that, you're going to make your decision on what you want to do with this rotation, whether Megill is added and one of the kids is taken out, or maybe you start to piggyback Holmes and Minaya. The Mets will have a lot of options at their disposal once they get through this week. They just got to figure out what's best for them at that point in time, and also where they're at in the race, which is where we're going to close the show really quick here. You look at the MLB standings after today. I don't even know if the Giants won their game yet, so that's going to be interesting for me to find out here in a second. Looking it up. What do we got? They lost. All right, so you got both the Giants and the Reds sitting at 72 and 71. They're both 4 games back in this wild card race. You got the Diamondbacks and the Cardinals each at 500, sitting 4.5 games back. And the Mets are 2 games back of the Padres. They had moved even with them, but then they lost their last 2 games, while the Padres won their last 2 games to beat the Rockies in a series over the weekend. The Giants coming up here, they are going to be playing against the Diamondbacks. So somebody's going to lose some ground in the wild card race. And the Reds are going to be playing in San Diego against the Padres, and the Padres are 43 and 25 at home this year. So this is where this wild card race is really not getting away from the Mets, because there's every chance that the Reds are going to lose in San Diego. They're not going to have Hunter Green going in that series. They probably won't have Brady Singer going either. Those have been their best 2 pitchers lately. We just saw them. So there's every chance the Reds are going to slip back under 500. And the Giants could as well if the Diamondbacks beat them up. And then all of a sudden it's the Diamondbacks who are chasing the Mets at the tail end of this week. You really never know. The Mets just got to focus on them. If they can manage to win 2 games in Philly, I think they're still going to be sitting with at least probably a 3-game lead going into the weekend. And then you just got to handle business against the Rangers, the Nationals, the Padres. For your homestand, actually, it's going to be the Rangers, the Padres, the Nationals, and then you got a series against the Cubs and a series against the Marlins, and that's it. It's pretty wild. 3 weeks left in this season, 19 games. The Mets sitting right now at 76 and 67. I think they probably have to get to maybe 87 wins to be a playoff team, you would think, unless everybody just keeps on losing. And if they're going to get there, that would require them to go 11-6. Actually, it's probably not even going to take that much, because for the Reds to get to 87, they would have to go 15 and how many games they have left? They have 143 that they've played, so they got 19 left. So they would have to go 15-4 down the stretch. So, I mean, maybe it's 85 wins you got to get to. So maybe you got to go. That's just so wild. I mean, the Mets could go 9-10 and still squeak into the playoffs. But you want to be riding some momentum going into the playoffs, and you also never know. I mean, the Giants, prior to losing these last two games, and which was also prior to me sending out a tweet when they were about to win again before blowing that game and essentially that series for the Cardinals on Saturday, when they were about to win the series and make it 13-14, I believe, or made that. Actually, that would have made it 12-13 that they had won. They had a 6-game winning streak. They lost a game. They won 5 in a row, and that would have been their 6th game in a row. So you never know. Any of these teams really could, go on a hot streak and win a bunch of games, regardless of who they're playing. So again, you got to handle your own business first and foremost. I do think if the Mets can go 11-8 over their final 19, I think that would probably be enough. But who knows? You really don't know. So we'll be covering, of course, everything that happens in this series. I'll have another show for you tomorrow morning. You'll have Chris Schubert on the postcast later tonight, giving you a show right after the final out. So make sure if you're watching on YouTube, or even if you're not, you subscribe so you can get that instant reaction show, which will also hit your podcast feeds as well. And if you are listening on those podcast feeds, do me a favor and follow, rate, and review. As always, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts and league-wide experts that'll take you through all the games. You check out Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.